Welcome to the Hoard's Dairyman podcast, your source for trusted, science-based information you can use in your dairy. Today's podcast is called US Dairies to the World. The host for today's show is the managing editor at Hoard's Dairyman, Kylene Anderson. Our guest is Krysta Harden, the president and CEO of the US Dairy Export Council.
1 in every 6 tanker loads of U.S. milk is exported. That's not a stat. That's the U.S. dairy industry evolving. It's the rising importance of the export markets. In this episode of the Hoard's Dairyman podcast, we're following our milk from the nearly 25,000 U.S. dairy farmers to global markets. We dig into how global trade is directly shaping your farm's future, from milk prices to product demand. And we are going to talk about where we're winning, where we're falling behind, and what every producer should know about your role in feeding the world. To guide us on this international adventure today is someone who's no stranger to the global game. Krysta Harden is the U.S. Dairy Export Council president and CEO. She's leading the charge to help producers just like you to navigate the complexities of global trade, build international relationships, and increase sales. More importantly, she and her team are highlighting the superior quality and sustainability efforts happening right here, right now in the U.S. Prior to her role here, she's also served as Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Ag, as well as other prominent positions in the ag sector. Krysta, I want to say thank you for being here today and being our tour guide.
Oh, thank you for having me. That was a nice introduction. I appreciate that.
Great. Before you help us connect all the dots on why dairy producers in Wisconsin, Idaho, or New York should care about policy in Southeast Asia or retail trends in Guatemala, let's talk about your background. We're both farm kids, but from different backgrounds.
For sure. I grew up on a farm in Southwest Georgia, not a dairy farm, but a peanut farm. So that's usually how I start my introduction. That's probably what I'm most proud of. That's those roots, that foundation from a dirt road that's in a photograph right behind my chair helps me remember where I came from. And came to Washington right out of college, out of UGA, and worked on Capitol Hill. Had a number of positions, and always in food and agriculture and sustainability, both in the private sector, but also in the public realm, executive and legislative branches. And I've been in dairy since 2019 and at USDEC since 21.
Great. So what took you to dairy? What was your transition moving over to the dairy industry?
Well, I believe in being at the right place at the right time. And I was working in corporate America, and Secretary Vilsack, who had the job that I have now at USDEC, called me and said, DMI, Dairy Management Inc., and our wonderful checkoff program is looking for someone to lead their global environmental strategy and help them set in sustainability goals. And they're interested in you. And he talked to me about that before, but had only been at this corporation for a few years, and I didn't want to make a jump too quickly. And he just kept saying, I think this is a good move for you. You want to work for farmers. You want to do the right thing. You want to give back. This is another way to do it. And he basically said, we're not asking again. So you got to make up your mind over the weekend. So it just seemed right. I really loved the industry. I didn't know it, I've never milked cows. I don't know that side of the dairy, but I understood the commitment and the hard work and the dedication on the nutrition side and on the farm side and sustainability, and a way to bring all that together and then communicate that to the world was just so exciting. It was just, an offer I really felt like I couldn't pass up. Now, the corporate side is really cool too. There are a lot of good things that happen there, and there are a lot of perks, I'll admit it, that kind of spoil you. And they pay a little better, I'll be honest, than farmers. But in my heart is always with the farmer, always with keeping farmers on the farm. I mean, every decision I've ever made in my career has been about what can I do to help that? How can I make a difference policy-wise, with politics, with a little p, that's going to help farmers stay on the land and hopefully the next generation to come back. So I've never regretted it, not for 1 minute. It is a wonderful industry, challenging industry. I'll be honest. It's a hard one, right? But so many returns, and certainly the mission of what DMI and also USDEC, that those are the things that really have driven me, and I'm very proud and happy that I'd made the decision.
That's great. So let's talk about what's happening for celebrating 30 years. So,
Yeah.
I mean, 3 decades, right? This is really incredible. U.S. Dairy Export Council, USDEC. Let's start at the beginning. Can you talk about, and maybe even going back to the relationship with DMI and DMI's foundation
Sure.
of USDEC?
Yeah, I think it's one that, looking backwards, there were, some really smart people in the room, farmers in the room, that realized that we are a productive, efficient industry, and we were going to get more so. And we were not going to be able to consume everything we were producing in the U.S. That doesn't mean, that that's a good thing, not a bad thing, because we're already saturated. Where 96% of households had dairy, usually multiple forms of dairy. In my home, it's ice cream and cheese. I'll be honest, that's what I live off of. But so they formed USDEC to really think about what we had left over, and that was only about less than 5% of production in those days. And it was, I think, I wasn't around them, but from what I've heard from farmers and others in the industry, kind of the afterthought. Yeah, we're going to send whatever we don't use somewhere else. And it was a lot of ingredients and powders and lower value products at that time. But we remain to be even more efficient. Technology, genetics, feed rations, all the things that make our industry so strong and so good, help production continue to increase. So over time, there became more and more interest in, should we be investing in other markets? Should we take exports seriously? And it's not just a few states. It's not just a few products. It's not just one market or two. We really need to ramp up and look holistically at the globe. Where can we be helpful? How can we listen to the consumers around the world and do a better job of meeting their needs, not just ours? Because for trade to work, and I think we all know this, it's got to work for the buyer and the seller, not just the seller. Somebody's got to want to buy. Somebody's got to be willing to buy. Somebody's got to know they need to buy. So we started, long before me, developing this holistic approach to exports and trade, starting with the farmers' really vision for wanting to grow their industry and being productive and bringing the next generation back and looking at new markets and listening to other customers, different cultures, different languages, different currencies, different political issues, really taking a much more sophisticated approach to exports over the last 30 years.
Can you talk about that growth a bit more, as far as, I know you have offices in countries around the world. Can you kind of give us the structure of USDEC?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'll start with the basics, and that DMI is our parent company and our largest funder, which means that farmers lead our organization. Our chair and vice chair are farmers. So even though we have 124 company members who pay dues based on production and other criteria, they're the processors, they're co-ops, they're allied industries, they're traders, they're exporters. They make up our other part of our arm of our organization. But again, we're led by farmers. So farmers help lead and make the decisions for USDEC, which I think gives us a strength that also gives us the cooperator status at USDA. So we're able to leverage farmer and member dollars with federal dollars because of this relationship and recognition by USDA that we recognize, because of this status, we are recognized by the federal government, and we can receive funding through grant programs and other programs to leverage those dollars. Those 3 legs of that funding tool gives us the ability to open offices, to do marketing plans and promotion activities around the world. Mexico is our biggest market, our closest ally, our closest neighbor. We have a very, very strong relationship there. And that was the first target, I think, in the early days. And then Canada, which also is a big dairy producing country. And we can get into that later. It's not always quite as smooth in Canada as it is in Mexico. But we work very closely with them But we also recognize that diversity of markets is also important and diversity of products is important. Different parts of the world need different kinds of dairy and ingredients and products, and that's ever changing, frankly. And when Secretary Vilsack was actually the CEO, in the position I hold now at USDEC, the decision was made to open an office in Singapore, the Center for Dairy Excellence. It was kind of a stake in the ground to say, hey, look, world, we're serious about exports. And it's a long way from the U.S., to Southeast Asia. We need an office there. So our member companies can use that test kitchen. We have a marketing team that covers the 11 countries of Southeast Asia. That was really another turning point of recognition. We're in it to stay. We're going to be very serious about the globe. And we have offices in Korea and Japan, two very, very strong markets as well. In China as well, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Middle East. It covers Northern Africa and the Middle East, a growing area for us. In South America, another great opportunity, we believe, for the future. And also Central America, which now with CAFTA, a zero tariff except for the current situation, another great potential. So we've looked at the map of the world and said, where can we make a difference? Who wants and needs dairy, more dairy in their diets? And can we help be a source, at least one of the sources, if not the source of choice?
That's fantastic. I think a lot of producers listening remember a time, like you mentioned, going back to the 30 years, that exports weren't much of an issue or weren't on the radar. And I personally remember going to an NMC meeting, it was about 20 years ago, and we were talking about how we need to be competitive on milk quality on the world stage. And now, we're talking about 1 in every 6 tanker loads or equivalent production heading out of the country. That's a really big shift. And you talked about the diversification of markets and the growth of markets. Where do you see the biggest potential growth coming right now?
Well, there's a couple like short term and midterm and then long term. Short term, I think the Americas are going to continue to be. Latin America is going to be our focus. Obviously, Central America, the countries, we had a trade mission with farmers to Guatemala in March of this year to go down there and work with that industry and look how we can gain greater share of that market. They like dairy in the diet. They eat a lot of cheese. They're accustomed to dairy in the diet. Other countries in South America as well. I think, where the proximity makes a difference. You don't have to travel so far. You can get product in and out easily if we can deal with some of the tariff and non-tariff issues. We focus a lot on tariff, but there's a lot of other non-tariff issues that present hurdles for us. So Central and South America, I would say, short term, the Middle East I mentioned earlier, I think we have great opportunity to continue to grow there. We're exporting more to Australia as they're suffering. Their dairy industry is suffering, yet they love dairy. They're looking to us, to fill some of those needs. And then, of course, Southeast Asia, I just came back with our chair, Becky Nyman, from the Philippines, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. So we continue to look at Southeast Asia as well. And we can talk about China because you can't ignore China with the population and what they have meant to growth in dairy exports. And how, if we're not going to be able to export there as much, what is the balance? Who fills that void? But what I would say in general is if you look at the globe and the world, so excited about what can happen in the future. And we can talk about Indonesia and the projects we're doing there. The biggest kind of frustrating, other than China, is Europe, where we have a big trade deficit with the EU. They bring a lot more product into the U.S. than we export there. So that's a big beef for us to be able to work through some of those non-tariff issues with the EU. So there's a lot to unpack. I'm sorry, but it's a big world and a lot of issues. And market by market requires expertise, understanding of the culture, local folks on the ground to help us maneuver through working with all those governments and different, sometimes obstacles or hurdles, at least challenges.
Yeah, I can't even begin to imagine the amount of work that goes into every single market to open up those opportunities. You touched on tariffs and trade. I guess, what is the biggest competitor for the U.S. right now when it comes to exports? And what are they doing different to get to the top?
Oh, very, very good question. We really compete with New Zealand and Europe, and they are very, very big traders. Trade is a very big priority. Almost, over a majority of the product in New Zealand is exported. It's a small country, and they produce wonderful dairy. I'm not going to say they don't. And they are geared to having trade agreements, to thinking about exports in a very positive. They wake up thinking exports. We do not in the U.S. I do, but not everybody does. New Zealand certainly does, and Europe as well. And Europe has established themselves as, the king of cheese, just the wonderful old world cheeses, and they try to protect their common names and really, have done a wonderful job of educating the rest of the world on how wonderful their products are. We're just late to the party. We are playing catch up. We will catch up and we will surpass these two big competitors in the future. We're not there today, but we have the ability to grow and expand where they really don't. And I believe that we have the best dairy and dairy products in the world. We just got to help the world understand that we do. Our competitors have been doing it a long time and doing it very, very well. And they have trade agreements we have not had. We hadn't had a free trade agreement in the U.S. in a long, long time. The rest of the world has much more of a free trade attitude towards it and aptitude to do it than we do in the U.S. right now, or have been for some time, frankly.
When you talk about the EU, in my previous life, I worked in a global role as well, so I have an understanding of, the policies and consumer perception in the EU. Do you believe that the farm program for the U.S. is giving us a competitive advantage on the world stage, or is that table stakes when you look at the shifting policies?
I think the farm program is a wonderful tool, and I'm very impressed with our industry for adopting the farm program when it did years ago. This is not a new thing, right? It changes and morphs and improves and listens to farmers and makes it easier for farmers, and it has to be adapted. All that is very, very positive. I think it is a marvelous tool. We don't talk about it enough. We don't explain what it is and why it's so useful. I think we're starting to get the message that the rest of the world wants to know what we're doing, and they're sometimes surprised, if not always pleased, when they learn that the farm program exists and how many farmers. And there's also tools that our processors are using as well that show their commitment to doing, what's good for not only people and community, but planet. Those are the things that the rest of the world is looking for. And the Europeans keep hammering home, frankly, that this is what they should be looking at. So we have to be a little bolder, I think, in how we talk about our commitment to these things, and the farm program and its tools it offers farmers, the voluntary approach that farmers take to do this. The government's doesn't have a hammer on your head saying you have to do it. Farmers are saying we're doing things that make sense for us economically. They're making sense for our natural resources, for my business. I think that is a wonderful story. And we tell it at USDEC. We tell it every chance we get to customers, to other governments, to influencers, to consumers, because it is a great tool. And our farmers are doing these things on a voluntary basis because they believe in doing the right thing for their business, for their country, for their industry.
So we've talked about some of the risks, competitors. Let's shift gears a little bit more about, the future and some real big positives that have been happening. You were recently in Wisconsin working with Mexico, which you talked about earlier. Can you talk a little bit more about that relationship?
It is the strongest in our industry. I didn't realize I knew it was valuable and important to have a good relationship with your biggest customer. That's just business, right? I knew that from business courses. But we have invested in those relationships and earned trust and respect farmer to farmer. Our farmer leaders go, they bring farmers. We host one year, they host another year. Last year, we were in Chihuahua, a big producing and processing part of Mexico. The farmers share, the best practices. They share their biggest concerns. They talk to each other. They care about each other's success. We cannot be successful as an exporter if the host country does not understand and appreciate dairy. And their government is going to ask about dairy and the diet first from their industry, from their farmers and their processors. Then they'll listen to us. So when we're the most successful is when we're both saying the same thing. We need dairy in the diet. It's a healthy, nutritious part of every age group, of every diet, well-being for every citizen. When their farmers and their industry says that, and then they say, support our industry, but we can't grow the pie any bigger. We need imports, and we'd like to import from the U.S. because of the high quality, the high value, and the trust we have in that industry. That's how you get the home runs. I'm a baseball fan, so I use a lot of baseball analogies, but that is, it's not just, singles. Sometimes it is home runs when you can work with an industry and this trust and respect among each other. Now, we need a healthy, robust industry in Mexico. We need them to be saying dairy in the diet is important, and for these reasons. And then when you're looking for how to way to complement, augment, grow the pie of dairy in the diet, the U.S. is the source of choice. And we grow our piece of that pie as the pie gets bigger. It's a long play. It didn't happen overnight. And our industry has invested in Mexico at all levels and stages. Our farmers are friends. The importers trust our processors and exporters. That comes from having these conversations, sitting down together, sharing meals, talking about issues, working out differences in a closed room, not in the press, and not, going at each other in any way. When we disagree, we try to get together and talk about why we do. What's the problem here? And then, there's a lot of things that we can help with, a lot of things they can help us with, but our market share has continued to grow in Mexico, I believe, because of that investment in people and trust, respect, us having high value products, and the Mexican helping us with the pull. We're not just pushing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like every farmer would know having good neighbors is, really, really important, and
That's
having that point. Relationship.
I love that analogy because they are our closest neighbor, and we can get there quickly. And during COVID, they suffered. Their peso currency fell, and we had to look to other markets to fill, our repertoire of exports. But the minute that Mexico recovered and came back, and they came back strong and quicker than the rest of the world, the first place they looked to again was the U.S. That's the kind of relationship you want. That's the kind of neighbor. That's the kind of friend, kind of partner. We talk about partners, not just business relationships. We're truly partners in growing the demand for dairy also in the country.
That's great. I know they consume a lot of cheese, but there's still room for a lot of cheese consumption growth in Mexico. So, and
proteins, the protein as well. Mm-hmm. That trend is happening, and we should talk about that because that trend is not just here or in the Americas. It's around the world. The recognition that more protein in the diet is good for all ages, and certainly one way to get protein is from dairy. And it does not have to be just a glass of milk. It can be in a smoothie. It can be, in a bar. It can be added to your meals. The functionality and the versatility of our proteins are just really starting to take off and growing demand for our proteins. So we would like to see, with all these cheese plants, you get a lot of whey. We'd like to see that used in more and more applications around the world.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point about the growth, but also the affordability.
Yeah.
Right. So from an animal protein standpoint, there's a real competitive advantage there on the affordability of the whey protein.
It's a good point. Very good point. And it's affordable. It's versatile. It can meet a lot of different criteria depending on the application and the cultural favorite foods. Not everybody eats Western foods, but they still need protein. They still need dairy in the diet. We were in Kenya in September. That's a long-term market for us, is sub-Saharan Africa. The biggest producing country in the continent of Africa is Kenya, and the biggest consuming dairy country is Kenya. and they use milk in their tea. Now that grosses me out. I'll be honest. I'm a sweet tea kind of girl with ice and a lot of sugar. Growing up in Georgia, but they have a lot of colonial influence from the UK in the day, and they use much of their milk in their tea. So we have to understand that when we're going to a market, that the consumption of dairy may vary, and it certainly does in Asia as well, and in other ways.
I actually was blessed to have traveled to Kenya, so I've had the experience of the tea and
Did you put milk in your tea?
The British style of
Yes.
tea. Speaking of British style, I know the UK agreements have been in the headlines recently as well. Do you want to share, since we're talking about the real positives of what, since technically the UK is not a part of the EU any longer, that's probably had some adjustments in the relationships and policies, if you want to touch on that.
Unfortunately, not enough on dairy yet. We have been hammering away at the UK for some time when the first Trump administration made it a priority. So we started our efforts then and have continued to try to chip away. Unfortunately, they still look a lot to the EU for their dairy imports, which is unfortunate. We will be there. The farmer leadership of USDEC and myself and some staff are going to the UK the end of this month. We're going to Brussels after that, but we will be sitting down with the British government talking about the importance of diversifying their imports. We're going to say the same thing to them we're saying to our government, making it too hard for us to get dairy in there. We can be competitive. We can help you supply your needs. Don't just look to the EU, look to the US as well. So that is a very, very big priority for us. I'm very hopeful that we'll continue to work with our government in advocating for those changes. So I would love to see them really diversify their imports, because right now they continue to get a lot of their dairy from the EU, and we know we can be competitive. We know our products are very close to what they like and eat, and some of them, came from the EU back in the day, in the old world days. So we're going to keep working on the UK. Very hopeful there.
Great. So you talked about, building those relationships, and we've talked about some of the trade tensions and the tariffs, and everybody knows that's been in the headlines. Are there specific markets or products that might be more resilient or more vulnerable to these tensions?
Well, I touched on China earlier because I think that's probably the biggest question mark for us. It's a big market for certain products. They have quit buying so much from the U.S. Our exports are down because of these tensions. It's hard to make that up quickly somewhere else. I'm hopeful that the issues with China will be resolved. They're much bigger than dairy. They're much bigger than agriculture, So we know that we're sometimes a pawn by the other side, and retaliation can come. So we're hopeful that these problems will be resolved quickly, because it does leave a hole, and our exports are down because of that. Growing in other parts of the world, we'll try to make up that. But, when one of your biggest partners is not buying so much anymore, it's hard to turn that overnight. It's just the reality of exports. You don't just change. You don't go down a grocery aisle and buy something else. It's very different when you're selling overseas. So we've got to be nimble. We've got to be flexible. We've got to look for other markets and products to other markets. And again, hopeful the situation with China will ease out. The tensions will release, and cooler minds will make good decisions for both countries. But in the interim, we're doing the best we can and continue to work with our government. They listen to us. We're very grateful for that. We talk about these problems. We talk about these challenges. They know and understand, and I really do appreciate the openness they have to listening to us, letting us provide details and concerns to them. So that's been a big help. But, it is the reality of what we're in. And, I also just remind people, it's not just tariffs, it's non-tariff issues. You can lower a tariff, but put so many restraints and registrations and certifications on us that we still can't get into a market. So we really communicate that to our government. USTR knows it completely. They understand we gave them 30 pages of details of non-tariff concerns. So when they're going and sitting down having these negotiations, it's not just the number on the tariff. It is all these other non-tariff really hurdles and obstacles that a country can put on, and an importer, an exporter trying to get into a market. So we are working very closely with USTR, U.S. Trade Representative, who's at the table negotiating, country by country, product by product for us. So that's important too, to have that recognition. It's not just tariffs. The non-tariff issues can be just as problematic in some places.
On that same vein, I think dairy, other than the powders, it's a perishable product. And I just think that's really an interesting aspect of, the complexities that are added, right? So you have the complexities of the trade barriers. Can you tell us, what does the team face when you have those complexities with something arriving at port and they're delivering one of the, a more perishable product?
Well, it's both ends, frankly. If you, I think that listeners will probably remember we had a lot of, coming out of COVID, a lot of shipping problems because we were buying so much that ships could turn around to Southeast Asia and Asia. It was cheaper for them to go back empty than to wait to load our product. So we would have products sitting ready to be loaded and the ship would pull out without it. So it's both ends. That can happen. We worked through all those issues, thank goodness. And now we have an issue of getting ships because not many is coming from China. So that's another issue, is having enough ships and tankers to take product back to Asia because everything is owned by others, not by the U.S. So that's an issue. And then if you get to a port and there's just, sometimes it's a real problem. There's some paperwork that's wrong or a certification that's missing. Sometimes it is on our end. Sometimes it's not. And that product's just sitting there, and sometimes in the hot sunshine or, on a tanker and not getting unloaded. So you have really three different places. You've got to have everything working together. And you've got to have this commitment to move product, especially perishables. Now, we're not a fruit and vegetable. They even have more of a problem. They can literally rot, sitting there, a fruit or something sitting at a dock. We don't have that critical, but we do have a perishable product, and it needs to be refrigerated in many cases. It needs to be, handled properly. So we have to make sure that we have a whole team. Our market access team is the team that works 24/7 every day of the year because of those kinds of issues. Once you get there, getting in, getting unloaded into your customer, or just making sure you're not sitting back here in the U.S. waiting to be loaded at a dock if there's problems on our end. So the logistics of exports is, it can pull your hair out and some days make you lose your religion.
I can't even imagine what the team deals with. So we talked about 30 years and walked through all the major changes that have happened in 30 years. If we start looking towards the future and you pull your crystal ball out, what do you think the next big growth opportunity is, and where does the next 30 years take us?
Well, we'll be number one exporter. There's no doubt about it. The U.S. dairy industry is so resilient, and dairy here is having a renaissance for sure. We're seeing our investments, the checkoff investments, and all the science and the micronutrients, all the health benefits are being greater understood with relationships that DMI has with Mayo and other very, very impressive and important, health institutions. As all that science just ramps up and continues. We're not resting on the halo of dairy, and the farmers are investing so much to make sure we are keeping up with what consumers want, what they're demanding in their diet. So I know for certain, I just feel so confident we're going to be the number one exporter, in the near future. We're going to grow markets. We're going to continue to help the rest of the world understand the benefits of dairy in the diet. Not every country understands that. If they don't have a robust dairy industry, that they've grown up thinking about dairy in the diet, it's not always there. They don't understand the first 1,000 days how important dairy is, or having dairy in the school to help kids get the nourishment they need. We're helping to educate that, and that will happen. We're doing it with other partners. It's not just all the U.S. Dairy Export Council. We have a lot of universities we work with and a lot of other partners. That work will continue, and in my mind, will probably ramp up. And awareness of dairy, the importance of dairy in the diet, is just going to grow. It's going to continue. Creating markets, creating opportunity for the U.S. dairy industry. A young family, young couple, young person saying, should I go back to my family farm? I get asked this a lot when I'm traveling. And I say yes, because of exports. You're going to have new markets you can't even imagine today. You can't even see them today. But around the corner, and that's what I'm paid to do, is to look around those corners. They're there. They're going to be there if we're willing to make the investment, commitment, do the work, remain that reliable, trusted source. It's just endless. It's just so exciting. It won't maybe not happen on my watch, but it'll happen pretty soon.
That's a really great message, I think. And, in the headlines, there's been a lot of the U.S. birth rate declining, China birth rate declining, but there's other parts of the world that, the demand for animal protein is just going to continue to grow. And as they have more availability and affordability of protein, will just continue to open up those doors, won't it?
Can I give you one example? Do we have time?
Yeah, we have time.
Indonesia. Indonesia. It's the fourth largest population in the world, an island country, right? So their production and agriculture, they just can't grow feed to grow their dairy, if nothing else. They just can't. Small dairies scattered across the multiple islands. Their current president says, I want school lunch and I want dairy in the school lunch for this population. So we have been working with them for a couple of years to help their farmers be more productive, animal care, food safety, to help grow trust of dairy in the diet. And then we are also working with their Chamber of Commerce and others across Indonesia to say the U.S. can help supply what you can't. That's what it takes. It's putting dairy in the diet in a place that doesn't really have it today because they don't have it available. But helping them understand, make the hurdles easier, make all the criteria for bringing in dairy from the U.S., get rid of those. We can help you help your dairy industry, grow demand. And it is what can happen over and over and over around the world where you don't have the traditional dairy kind of loyalty because it just hadn't had it. They didn't have it available. So you don't grow up with it. You don't have it. So many patterns in our lives and our eating habits are set young by our parents, by home, by our schools. If you don't have that, you're not going to choose dairy later in your life, and you're not going to choose it for your family. So we got to change that pattern, and I think we're doing that in a country like Indonesia. Again, the fourth largest population in the world.
Wow. Yeah, not only can they have a difficult time growing feed, but keeping your cows cool if you have a European-based breed of cattle. And I mean, it's really difficult to make milk in a country that's very, very tropical. So,
well, I'll tell you, the University of Wisconsin is working with us on genetics for them. The North New Mexico State and Department of Agriculture is our other partner in this plan with Indonesia. We bring our expertise across the dairy industry in the U.S. and are helping to teach farmers and give them the opportunity to learn and to know what might be available to work better. Some of them, it's kind of basic stuff that our farmers have been doing a long time. We can share that information and again, build trust in dairy in the diet and hand in hand with the Indonesians.
Yeah, that's a really good point because when they have that local production, that opens the doors for the imports.
It does.
It
really does. The demand grows, the pie grows, our piece of the pie grows. I mean, that in very simple terms is what USDEC does.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Well, kind of as we're wrapping up here, just a closing question. What shifts do you see the U.S. dairy industry making or continue to be made so that we can stay competitive on the world stage? So like I mentioned, going back to 20 plus years ago when we were talking about somatic cell counts, which has multifold benefits to continue to reduce somatic cell counts and improve milk quality. What do you see, on that, again, looking forward front?
Well, I think the continued investment in in research to understand the health benefits of dairy is something that I think we have to continue to do to help make the case to the rest of the world. It's a vital part of a diet. No matter where you live, what's your station in life, it doesn't matter. You still need a good, healthy diet. And dairy is probably the one food that can give you so much, even if you're on a very, very limited income and living, on pennies and dollars a day. Dairy is still worth that investment. So those investments that our industry is making in nutrition are critical. I just see that. Also, just in the modernization, using innovation and technologies on the farm, labor is going to continue to be an issue for us and my guests are going to continue to look at ways to deal with those kinds of costs and problems for the dairy farmer to make sure they're able to stay on the land to produce this great product. We've got to continue to make those kind of investments. Sustainability around the world, people ask us about our commitment to sustainability, our farmers' commitment. Those investments will pay off for our farmers. We talked about the farm program. We talked about other technologies. Farmers do that because they make good business sense. They also are good, to tell the full story, the complex story of U.S. dairy, the diversity of U.S. dairy. We're in every state, all sizes, all types of cows, all types of farming. That's the richness and the beauty and the strength. That diversity of production is so good for the U.S. and our story around the world. Those kinds of things we're going to continue, I think, to invest in and be able to tell. Again, bring those young farmers back. Most of them are college educated or technical school educated. They're bringing all sorts of new ideas and new ways of farming, challenging their parents and grandparents sometime, which is not all bad about doing things different. That energy, that excitement about this industry is going to keep it alive and viable. We're going to continue to be dependent on the U.S. consumer. There's no doubt about that. But the rest of the world needs nourishing. It's not just food. We're not just helping to feed the world. And I correct people. I've been corrected over years, so I know this. It's nourishment, not empty calories, nourishment. And that can start with dairy. And that's got to be our story. It works today. It will work more so in the future as consumers become better educated and understanding the value and the importance of a healthy diet of nourishment and not just food, but really making sure they're healthy and their kids are growing stunning, immunity, all the kind of things that a lot of countries are looking at and concerns about their own populations. Dairy can help. We're not the only answer. I know that, but we're a big part of the answer. And I think that's what's going to drive our industry to a really, really bright future.
That's fantastic. I think that's a really great point. Boy, we have covered a lot today. But before we wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to, leave listeners with any final thoughts that you might have.
Well, I usually end with a thank you because the dairy farmers, goodness gracious, are the hardest working people in the world. And, I just admire their commitment. I admire their dedication to producing this product. They love their animals. They love their businesses, but they do it from a place in their heart that just is so easy to talk about around the world. I get so excited and so animated when I'm talking about who produces the U.S. Dairy, this wonderful product, because I know them and I just want to thank them for hanging in there through some tough times. Farming's a cycle. There's good and bad and ups and downs. And I just thank those for hanging in there and encourage the next generation to look at dairy as a real possibility for a very successful, prosperous business and a wonderful way to raise their families. And to continue to do what they do is I just say thank you. It is wonderful to work for this industry. And I've worked for a lot of industries, but this one is something that is very special and it doesn't go unappreciated or unnoticed.
Fantastic. Krysta, this has been a powerful look at the U.S. dairy and how we're building momentum around the world. We really appreciate USDEC and the work that you're doing and giving us some, insider info on what we should keep a pulse on over the next few months and years. So you've been listening to Krysta Harden, U.S. Dairy Export Council President and CEO. And Krysta is going to be joining us again very soon to discuss the role of women in agriculture and then specifically in dairy. Women in dairy are driving innovation and shaping the future of agriculture. If you would like to be the first to catch this conversation when it drops, make sure you're following us on YouTube or your favorite podcast player so you don't miss a beat, especially as we dig deeper into issues that are shaping dairy's future. If this episode added value for you, please sure to share it with someone who would appreciate it too. So the more we share, the stronger our industry voice becomes. Thank you, Krysta.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Hoard's Dairyman podcast. Follow us on your favorite podcast app, and don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. See you next time.